Okay, I think we should get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joji John. I'm the president of Malayali Association of Social Workers in Ontario, MASO. MASO is an association of immigrant professional social workers from the province of Kerala, India. Currently, we have almost 300 members in our fraternity, which is spread across Ontario. MASO has been implementing several initiatives for the professional development of our members and our community in general. In addition to our members, leaders of several Malayali organizations, our friends from the larger Indian diaspora, and some of our white friends and well-wishers from our workplace are also attending this webinar today. We want our young generation as well to understand the realities they live in, especially how racism, supremacy, and related systemic issues affect their lives while they navigate the social system alongside their education and employment, and motivate them to involve in discourses that influences in shaping their future. Towards this end, we have included 10 school, college, or university students as well in this webinar. We also have representatives from several social work schools in India, like Bhopal School of Social Work, BCM College, Guru Nanak College, Madras School of Social Work, etc. We understand that conversation on anti-blackness, race, white supremacy, or casteism make many of us uncomfortable, and we often avoid such conversation as a community in general. However, we are in a critical juncture of history, our time, where these concerns have become more significant than ever before. Please note that this is the first time we are conducting a formal conversation on anti-blackness in our Malayali community, and MASO is proud to bring everyone together to champion this cause. On behalf of MASO executive team, I would like to extend warm welcome to each one of you, our friends from our workplace, representatives from other organizations, our youth, and all our members who are present here today. Friends, this conversation may make us uncomfortable, but surely provoke and challenge our thinking, ignite and elevate our minds, and enrich in reshaping the way we see the realities around us. Let us use this an opportunity to learn and unite our biases and prejudices to become better warriors of justice individually and collectively. Let us begin with the land acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Schuylkill, Hiawatha, and Alderville First Nation. We are so privileged to have Mr. Prasad Nair, who is one of the advisors of MASO, as the moderator for this session. Prasad has over 20 years of combined experience in the areas of child welfare, counseling, leadership, and labor welfare in both for-profit and non-profit sectors. He is currently working as the director of North Branch with the Children's Aid Society of Toronto. He started his career in child welfare as a family service worker with Peel Children's Aid and served in various capacities such as manager, CPIN lead, and supervisors of various teams. Prasad Nair has a Master's of Social Work and Bachelor of Law degree from India, and also a Master's of Social Work from York University. He also possesses leadership certification from various universities. Prasad has significant equity experiences and is passionate about leading equity-based engagements for better outcomes for communities. He is an active volunteer in the community. In the past, he served as board member of Ontario Association of Social Workers Centre and worked as part of the project team during the inception of Ryerson University's Internationally Educated Social Workers Program. He's the president of Mississauga Kerala Association. He lives in Mississauga with his wife, Bindu Elizabeth, who is a registered social worker, as well as an active member of MASO, and they have 2 children. Welcome, Prasad, and please take this forward. Can you unmute?
Thank you, Georgie. Thank you. I know for a moment I was thinking that you're talking about someone else, but it's always a pleasure being part of MASO and especially with such an energetic young leadership of MASO. It's my privilege, and thank you for that. So today is a remarkable day for all of us here. And then, making a decision to be here and to present and to devote your 2 hours for a discussion on anti-Black racism shows your commitment to equity journey. So I thank you all for that. Let me quote Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Let's not forget about that. Living as a non-white people in North America, we are faced with varying instances of discrimination across our different identities every day. There is a thread of shared experiences of oppression which runs through all people of color. But as a non-Black people of color, it is vital to recognize that being Black is not the same. While we struggle from misidentification and threats that have emerged in a post-9/11 world, the racism we know and experience is generally in the form of microaggressions. I'm not forgetting to the fact that this is a diverse group where we do have non-South Asians in this, but in generally majority of us are from non-South Asian Kerala background, so that's why I'm using these examples. These microaggression concerns are valid, but what we face on a daily basis cannot be compared to the injustices inflicted upon George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, and countless others. As non-Black people of color, we are allowed to exist in a way that the Black community is not. A part of the reason for this is something called the model minority myth. And Jean will be talking about that, and we will be having further discussions around it. As a condensed definition, it is the false belief that our being a South Asian or a brown makes us more valuable or peaceful members of society. This is also due to the stereotype that we as an immigrants and our children perform better academically or otherwise, and are therefore more successful in their endeavors than any other person. Our lives are perceived as being worth more simply because of a stereotype. And I want that to be, we all need to be understanding this. It's simply because of a stereotype we have been associated with, along with our potential monetary value to some of the employers. It has become glaringly obvious that if we embrace this myth, we become guilty of giving in to the very systems that we claim to have fought against. If we so badly want to become more than a stereotype, we need to dissect how this model does more harm than good, especially to those outside of our community. It is difficult to start with ourselves when we actively see so much injustices at the hands of others. But deprogramming these subconscious messages that we carry is a significant step. And that's what MASO is intended to do by organizing sessions like this. This is why the differentiation between Black people and other racial minorities matters. The umbrella term, people of color, does not apply to every situation. We cannot empathize if we are part of or contributing to a problem. If you are not Black, then it is your job to continually counteract anti-Black rhetoric in our communities. The internalized racism and anti-Blackness within each of our individual communities have long perpetuated by white supremacy and the continued violence against Black community. As a non-Black people of color, we too often settle into harmful neutral territory when it comes to Black lives. To stand in solidarity with our Black community means we must be actively anti-racist, not simply not racist. To stop brushing aside the anti-blackness many of us have learned and been complicit to within our respective communities. We have heard and excused it too often in our circles, with our friends and families. It is just how they are. They are just joking. They had this one experience. So please don't generalize. They do not mean to say this. So we hear all these things in our conversations. We need to do better, and having direct and honest conversation is a part of it. In general, as a non-Black people of color community, we have the luxury of being surrounded by our own culture, and we have been able to take our time, handle the consequences of our own diaspora. This is not the case for all the populations that living in Canada. So it's fundamental truth that majority of us are protected in a manner that contributes to harmful stereotype and further justification to racism. I know it's a hard to dissect, it's hard to take to our heart, but being in helping professional and being social workers, this is our opportunity for to acknowledge and agree to it. With these words, let me welcome our presenter for the day, Jean Samuel, President and owner of Arise International Promotions. Jean is an experienced leader with a demonstrated history of working with individual and family service industry in Ontario, highly skilled in nonprofit organizations, government and public speaking, training and development, a strong equity professional with a sound track record in leadership development and organizational change management. I have personal experience working with Jean, and I always admired her for her passion and also her courage and also her ability to navigate the most difficult conversations. After her bachelor's from University of Toronto, Jean Samuel started her career as a sessional professor at Mohawk College, teaching workplace diversity. Her passion in diversity, equity, and inclusion took her to different roles in the past 25 years, such as a facilitator, supervisor, director with Children's Aid Society of Hamilton, Children's Aid Society of Peel, Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies. Jean is an expert in equity, diversity, and inclusion. She offers consultative services to support effective implementation of strategic equity, diversity, anti-racism, anti-Black racism, anti-oppression, inclusion action, and implementation plans. Jean specializes in effective development and facilitation of EDI, learning and unlearning training programs for senior executives and staff members within the social services and human service sector. And we are glad that Jean has agreed to spend her valuable time with us for an effective discussion on deconstructing ABR in social work practice. Jean is a certified Canadian inclusion professional and also a certified ProSci ADCAR change management professional. And she's also trained in community engagement, community health, and social service work. So, as a moderator, my request is that please listen to these conversations. I encourage you to take notes, reflect, and actively participate in this disclosure by asking questions. Please use the chat box facility to ask your questions. There is no stupid questions, so please don't worry. Always ask questions, challenge. And please write your questions in the chat box, and Alan and I will be monitoring those chat area, and we will be helping Jean to answer those questions. While we are participating in this conversation, I want you to pay attention to your body sensations, your emotions. What are your thought processes? What are our emotions? From where we are getting those vibes? Let's reflect, challenge, and build our minds and muscles to be a better ally. So let me end this with a quote from Eldridge Cleaver. He is a noted Black political activist and American author. He once said, and I quote, "There is no more neutrality in the world. You either have to be part of the solution or you are going to be a part of the problem." So I'm glad that Maso has decided to be part of a solution, and you all have made a decision to be part of the solution. And welcome everyone, and over to you, Jean.
Thank you so much, Prasad, and all of the members of the Maslow organization for allowing this very, very important conversation to happen. I think as racialized communities and people, we often don't sit in the other side of the conversation in terms of really understanding, our own ability to work through racism and anti-Black racism in particular, because it does exist here in Canada. And, most of what we see on our global news is very much dedicated to what's happening in the US. But, with the unfortunate incident of the death of George Floyd, we are thankfully, for the first time, having more critical conversations and seeing more critical discourse on anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism in Canada, right? And the issues have been around for a very, very long time. And the lack of race-based conversations in Canada is through our denial of the issue, and our approach more often than not to a multicultural idea of what Canada is. We were after all the end of the Underground Railroad for many of the escaped slaves from the United States. So we sit on that. But the social determinants of health tell us that, Blacks in particular, along with Indigenous peoples, are suffering anti-Indigenous and anti-Blackness. And so this conversation is not new. It's just very much well-timed given the current climate and the context of what we are seeing with the racial tensions exploding across the globe. It's a bittersweet pill to have to even think that we need to thank George Floyd for the sacrifice of his life for bringing us to this pivotal point in Canada, but we should pay homage to this wonderful human being for being that sacrifice for us to dive deeper into the context of these conversations. And the tensions are there. It's causing Black rage and white rage that has existed, and as sort of the volcano has erupted. And now we have to really sit in this conversation, not only as Blacks, but as other racialized communities dealing with this current world pandemic and racial unrest, and having individuals actually situating, speaking about these issues in a critical way as adults and as children and youth and collectively as communities. And I think for the first time, I see whites also engaging in this conversation as if their eyes have been opened to the realness of anti-Blackness for the first time, when anti-Blackness has been something that we have been protesting against for millennia. So, I'm happy to be here to have this conversation. Many people do call me an expert, but I refrain from that. I think the minute you think you're an expert of anything, you have lost some way. And so I know that I'm learning continually. I have lots of knowledge that I hope to impart on you, but I'm gonna probably be learning just as much from everyone on this conversation today. And the medium of having a virtual space is a new one, and we'll talk about that as well. I do prefer a more touchy kind of feeling in person. Thank you, Cushman, for advancing us. But this is what we have. This is the context of our new world, and so we'll do this conversation as much justice as we can. So a couple of guidelines before we progress, right? And this is just the standard kind of space that we want to be in, understanding that we're all coming from different spaces and demographics, even as racialized. And I know we have some allies on the line as well. So we will have to practice our humility and vulnerability and be as authentic. It's difficult conversation. You're not gonna like all of the avenues that we go down to, but as Prasad said, sit in that and see what comes up for you and understand you're reacting to something, and the contrast in there of what's been said and your reaction In the middle of that is some awakening, some learning and unlearning. And so I encourage you to grapple with it. You'll get as much as you put in. And you'll have to take some risks in terms of sharing, you know, some of those deeper parts of yourself that often we hide away or don't let come to the surface. And I encourage you to do that. And you know, there is no silly question and no silly feeling. And it's complex. We won't have all the answers to solve all of the inequities of anti-blackness and racism in this, but we'll try to be as safe and respectful as we can as we allow ourselves to be vulnerable without trying to name, shame, or blame anyone as they bring their whole selves into the conversation. But my role and the role of the moderators, Prasad and Alan, is to ensure that everyone is safe during this conversation. Next slide. So as I said, it's a new context of virtual space. And so as we dive into conversations on racism, which I call the four-letter word of equity, nobody really wants to talk race when it comes to dealing with you know, institutional systemic issues of inequity. It becomes the last thing people want to dive into. It becomes the conversation that people become most agitated in. And so at the outset, let's just recognize that we're dealing with the most difficult form of oppression that it exists in you know, the space of trying to create equity. And as I said, we haven't solved how to do this effectively, so we will make mistakes. But as we sit and hold each other in this virtual space, there will be no, of course, verbal or racist attacks. We won't victim blame. No intentional harm, but harm will come to some individuals if they've never sat in this type of honest conversation on race and racism and anti-blackness. And so when you are being what I call triggered, I ask you to hold on to your seat and ask yourselves, why are you feeling the way that you're feeling? And the rhetorics around, you know, some of the stereotypes that support anti-blackness and creates racial harm will also not be tolerated. We will be interrupting that. And we are not in a space to be diving into conversations, you know, like all lives matter, Jean, and police lives matter, and not all white people are, and you can fill in the blank. This is not the conversation we're going to have today, because we're not here to justify and prove that anti-blackness and anti-black sentiment exists. We are here to explore where and how and why. Okay, so that's the kind of topic of the conversation on the outset. Next slide. And a few objectives that I hope you will be taking away, you know, to learn something new that you don't know about the African Canadian community, recognize and understand conversations of power and privilege and the dynamics of that, increase some of your cultural relevance and responsiveness as social workers to the community that is of African descent. And hopefully you'll come away with some skills on how to address anti-blackness and enhance your understanding in your role as social service workers and providers, so you can be change agents for racial equity and identify those strategies to enhance racial equity in your organizations and for yourself moving forward. Next slide. So I think we've already gone through the truth and reconciliation, but I just wanted to sort of highlight that, you know, as Indigenous peoples, there's an intersection often that we don't talk about, which is there are many and a growing community of demographics of individuals who are both Black and Indigenous. And oftentimes we want them to be one or the other, and we don't kind of intersect the conversation of this multitude of identity that individuals experience from both sides. And so as I'm talking through anti-Blackness, no, I'm not drawing in people with their Indigenous identity automatically into that, because Indigenous peoples don't see themselves as a race of people, but nations of people. And that's the distinction as to why the Indigenous conversation is never like automatically drawn into an anti-racism conversation. They call it an anti-Indigenous conversation, right? And so know that this is a complex space to live in, because there are some Indigenous people that identify as Black also. And so how can they live in that hyphen, and how can we support this duality? The difference is that often there are legislation and laws federally that support their indigeneity that we don't have for them to support their Black identity. And so we have to try to understand that complexity. But if they exhibit as African descent and they're still indigenous, they get drawn into anti-Blackness right away. And I think as social service providers, you have to sort of try to figure out how you can honor both parts of themselves. And this goes for all biracial, multiracial individuals that present more as what we call socially as Blacks, because we know that race is a social construct, but if they have got more African characteristics in how they present to community and people, they are going to experience anti-Blackness. And the complexity of that is in the intersectionality, and we need to spend more time there. Next slide. I wanted also to pull on, you know, my indigenous brothers and sisters in their reconciliation, and you know, there is much happening in the Canadian context. Some well, but most not very well with that reconciliation. But there's a reconciliation that needs to happen in the context of the history of Blacks and people of African descent here in Canada. And many people don't know about the history of people of Canada and what's happened. And so I just have a few questions for you in relation to that. And you can, you know, use the chat box to reply. So the question is, were enslaved Africans in the United States, in Canada, or both? What do you think? Well, did we have enslaved Africans in Canada, in the United States, or both? Where did we have enslaved Africans? Both. Okay, most people agreeing both. Looks like most people are familiar with this history, which is a good thing. Yes, we did have enslaved Africans both here in Canada and in the United States. Slavery was abolished in 1865 in the United States. It was abolished here in 1793 when the governor, Jane Groves of Simcoe, put forward for the abolishment of slavery in Canada. But it wasn't until 1834 when the British Empire abolished slavery that it became enacted, right? So yes, for over 200 years, slavery existed here in Canada, but most often all we hear about is that Canada was the land of for free slaves. Did we have legally segregated schools here in Canada or just in the United States? Were they legally segregated schools here in Canada or just in the United States? What are your thoughts? You can answer in the chat. Canada, some say just Canada, some say both you. Here in Canada also. Yeah, again, there were segregated schools for people who identified as African descent or Black here in Canada. People think it's just the United States. Yes, it was closed in 1983, as someone said in the chat. Do you know what province the last segregated school closed in? Winnipeg is not the right answer. Nova Scotia, that's correct. Nova Scotia. The last segregated school closed in 1983 in Nova Scotia. Any guesses of the year the last segregated school closed here in Ontario? What year did the last segregated school close here in Ontario? It was in the 1900s, 1965. And the Common Schools Act of 1850, where the Egerton Ryerson, who was the superintendent of schools, he would not repeal it. And it wasn't until 114 years later, 1964, that they changed the Schools Act to be non-segregated. We also had things in Canada that we call sundown towns, where Black people had to be out of town by sundown, or they would be physically harmed, right? We also had schools that, were day schools for Blacks as well. And we barred Black people from fighting alongside white soldiers in World War I. And, this happened in the United States, but it happened here in Canada too, where Blacks were segregated or not allowed to participate. Where do you think the first race riot occurred? Which country, Canada or the United States? The first race riot. Canada or the United States? US, okay. Any other answers? US. That is incorrect. The first race riot in North America occurred in Nova Scotia in 1784, when the soldiers returning from the American Revolution returned to the town of Shelburne in Nova Scotia, and Blacks had started to build businesses and were employed because all of the white soldiers had left to fight the American Revolution. And the white soldiers, upon returning, saw most of the Black families succeeding in Shelburne and were very upset that they couldn't get employment. And they burnt the town and the property and the homes of Blacks to the ground. And that's, again, was in Shelburne, Nova Scotia in 1784. And so this just gives you a very brief history. And those questions were developed by Tana Turner Consulting in some work that she did to expose to Canadians the history of Blacks in Canada. And many towns do have very portions of their towns that were viable, where Blacks settled, because this was part of the Underground Railroad. So many Africans did come here to escape slavery. And there are many towns across the country where Blacks have settled, but were destroyed. And we'll talk more about the impacts of that. One of the things that we have to explore is the roots of oppression, right? And understanding that oppression is deep. It operates at many, many different levels. And so you will see anti-Blackness at all of these levels as well. You might be familiar with the sort of iceberg triangle that exposes oppression. Well, this is just another concept of it. And it really just helps us to really dig beneath what is actually happening in the roots of oppression. If you know and have ever tried to remove a tree, a very old tree, from your property or from the ground, it really spans. The roots span. Most trees occupy 2 to 4 times the diameter of the crown of the tree, and can occupy areas of 4 to 7 times the surface diameter of the crown. And so it really just picture a really big picture of how deeply entrenched at the root systemic anti-Blackness can be. And the approach that you have to take to unearth anti-Blackness is a deep, methodical, long journey to get at every root, because it has been there historically. This is what our institutions are built on. And so we have to take the time, not that what is at the branch level and the soil level is also not important, but why we haven't seen much change in our institutions is because at the root level, where all of the roots are anchored in our institutions, anti-blackness is ingrained and entrenched, and we have to extrapolate root by root the cause of the anti-blackness, through which we'll get more into in terms of the ideas and notions of who Black individuals are in relation to others. Next slide. So what we have to understand about the roots of oppression when we're talking anti-Blackness is the roots of white supremacy, which is, thanks to people like Mr. Trump, we are having actually spaces where we can actually name the behaviors of those that are anti-Black for what it is. And we're seeing more and more white supremacy, the growth of white supremacy under leaderships of individuals like Donald Trump. White privilege is supported by the ideas and notions of white supremacy. And it is these things that we have to start to talk more about and get more comfortable of naming in our institutions in order to deal with the roots of what are causing anti-Blackness. And so we have to challenge each other across our groups to really sit in this very, very difficult conversation of white supremacy and white privilege, and also what we will explore, which is this cross-racial hostility, which is white privilege and white supremacy is still at the roots of, to help us better understand anti-Blackness. And that's the part I think we will explore a lot today as we are speaking, anti-Blackness in a South Asian context, right? Which we need to do more of. Next slide. So what is racism? And Priest et al. Has defined racism as things that are manifested, usually through negative stereotypes and emotions, and through fear and hatred, that these behaviors and practices become like ingrained, right? And included, but they're limited in terms of the views of those that are racialized. And it causes unfair treatment. It can cause people to be threatened, and it also can come across in these nuanced ways that are nonverbal through things that we're going to explore, like microaggression, right? And so these notions of racial constructs and what race is have been developed intentionally, and scientists have done much work and theorizing and research on the notion of race, and have landed on the idea that race is a social construct, and there's less than 1% of a gene makes us different in the terms of the way that we look racially, but that so much has been sort of put on top of that difference that has caused racism to exist. And the ways in which we are different is so minuscule in our DNA structure, but so much is laden on that difference that we then treat each other quite abhorrently based on that. And we'll talk more about that. Next slide. So the concept of anti-racism is, I think, where we need to land. And anti-racism is the practice of identifying, challenging, and changing those concepts, constructs, and ideas of the minuscule difference that we have in our DNA that has been weighted so heavily. And when we are in a position to understand that we need to deconstruct this idea and perception of what race is, we become anti-racist. And that the Ontario Anti-Racism Secretariat has given this definition of what it means to be anti-racist. But in the ideas of we all experience as racialized people racism, there is a different type of racism that those that are African descent or Black experience. And this is anti-Black racism. I wonder if someone in our audience would volunteer. Are they able to unmute Kusuma to read this definition for us? Or someone from the committee could read it, might be most easy, or one of our moderators. I'm fine, as long as it's not me.
I could do it if you want. I don't mind.
Okay, who are we speaking with?
This is Namita. I'm a first-year university student.
Fantastic, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Over to you.
Anti-Black racism. Anti-Black racism is a conceptual framework for understanding a dialectic that involves a particular form of systemic and structural racism in Canadian society, which historically and contemporarily has been perpetuated against Blacks and highlights the resistance against dominant and hegemonic systems of whiteness and the building of agency and social transformation against racism and other forms of oppression.
Thank you for that. And that definition comes from A. Benjamin, who is a Black Jamaican, and does a lot of writing on the making of the ideology of Blackness, and has worked at the University of Toronto. And there is a kind of a collective kind of trauma that those that are African descent carry because of their connection to being of African descent. And in the context of our experience in Canada, you know, it's really impacted by the legacy of oppression that we have experienced here and globally. And what ties us together in the anti-Black experience is this legacy. What is the legacy of our experience? That's a question.
Jean, there is a question in the chat box. Mr. Anthony Thomas is asking, what is hegemonic systems? I think the question is coming from Aqua Benjamin Scott.
Yeah, so and a hegemonic system is really talking about a ruling or dominant system in a political or social context. So it's usually hegemony is the way that we are controlled, usually by states and others. And I think it derives from an ancient kind of Greek system of a political kind of military dominance that's used. And the dominant state then is known as hegemon. Is that good?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so it's political, economic, and often also can be military in nature. So, you know, back to the question of what the collective is that we experience in terms of this legacy of oppression through anti-Blackness is the legacy of slavery. And it's not that slavery did not exist for other, or let me rephrase that. It is not that enslavement did not exist for other racialized groups and communities of people. I know it happens to many South Asians in terms of when slavery was abolished, the African slave trade, they looked to the next best worst thing. And I say that tongue in cheek because the thoughts and ideas of the Africans as less than, like the bottom of the racial hierarchy that, and I say racial hierarchy in quotes because racial hierarchy really doesn't exist, but it's constructed to exist. To be Black and African was to be at the bottom of that racial hierarchy. So that when the revolts and slavery was abolished, they looked to the next best in terms of the racial hierarchy, and those were the South Asians. Much of the India and Pakistan communities were then brought as indentured laborers to places like the Caribbean and Africa. And there's much research that you can do and probably know about that. And that's usually in the context and the tension of this conversation about, well, South Asians too had a form of oppression that was a form of slavery, and we never talk about that. And I agree to a point, but the enslavement of Africans was quite a different and more horrific type of enslavement. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of our preferred minority experience. Next slide. So, you know, in the context of understanding really that, you know, the anti-blackness does not just operate on a level that is looking at just the color of one's skin. It is also operating on a level that integrates the history, the culture, the identity. It's operating through power and economics. That's the hegemony of the oppression. It's operating through the internal pieces of bias, privilege, and things like internalized racism, which we'll talk about. But it's also operating on the external with us in our ways that we interact with each other as racialized community, in our institutions and in the structures that operate to keep communities functioning together. And it is in these pieces where anti-blackness needs to be examined, because these systems, these institutions, these interpersonal relationships often collude together to ensure anti-blackness is kept intact, right? And the oppression of the African Blacks are then normalized because of the colluding within these external factors. We're gonna watch a video now, what is entitled What Dark-Skinned People Want You to Know, which really exemplifies some of what I'm trying to get at in terms of the experience of dark-skinned people across communities, but keeping in mind the lighter, the brighter, the better, quotes unquote, is what we experience in our racialized status. So the darker, the more melanin you have in your skin, the deeper your anti-Black experience. So if we could roll that video, that would be great. It looks like it's a little slow on my end and I can't hear it.
It shapes the way she moves through the world. There's something about having darker skin on a male body that shapes the way in which he moves through the world. It has real life stakes.
From what I've seen growing up, dark skin equates to being poor, dirty, ratchet.
They tend to be the bad guys in Tyler Perry movies. Straight from the border.
That doesn't even make any sense. I'm not deemed as beautiful, therefore I am not beautiful. And those two are not really mutually exclusive.
Could it be that something as early as colonization or slavery is primarily responsible for our beauty standards today? We're talking about who works in the field and who works in the house. We're also talking about rape, the rape of slaves to produce people who are known as mulattoes or mixed race. These standards of beauty travel. Eurocentric standards of beauty travel.
In the Dominican society and our culture, they have a phrase that's like mejorando la raza, advancing the Dominican population and making sure we're going into how they say the better. If you're lighter, you're bettering the race and you're bettering the island, versus if you're just being you.
I would get called the blackness. One joke that really stuck with me was like, oh, Edgar's so black that when he leaves a car, the check engine light turns on. That was a reference to my skin being as dark as oil. I felt ugly being of a darker skin tone. So I tried to gel my hair, or I started listening to skater punk music. So I tried culturally to lighten myself, if that makes sense.
I went on a trip to Korea with my mom. Some woman walked up to my mom and she asked, "Why is your daughter so dark?" In Korea, you have to be pale, and I almost felt like a foreigner and not so much Korean anymore.
When we turn off the lights, they say, "Oh, Salorm, where did you go?" Or, "Oh, you're really pretty for a dark-skinned girl." Are you saying that my race and just the fact that I am Black, is that not attractive in general?
I remembered one time that I wanted to be an angel in a parade. At that time, they were like kind of racist, you know, they didn't like Black people to be angels. And my mommy got kind of freaked out. She was going like, "Please, don't, you cannot be an angel." because they're gonna laugh at you. I said, but mommy, I am an angel. And finally, I was an angel. And I was the only black angel walking in the street. And my mommy was so proud about it, and I was proud too.
My mom started buying me a cream called Fair and Lovely. I was in 3rd grade when I started using bleaching creams. And the whole general idea was, if I'm lighter, I'll have a better life. I'll find somebody that's gonna love me. There would still be light and dark patches on my body and my face. It's painful, it would hurt, and I started breaking out in like bad rashes. And no one said anything. I had to stop it myself.
How do we fix this? We think critically about colorism. We think about where it began and where it begins and ends with us.
I think change starts with providing more diversity, providing more examples of people that look like you.
If you look at telenovelas, they usually cast the dark-skinned person as the villain. And if you never met a Latino before, you're gonna somewhat think that.
So in Japanese media, I honestly don't think I've ever seen a darker-skinned female. I feel it would be nice to see a change.
It needs to start within our own culture, where we can't have Will Smith filling in every slot for Black people. Giving dark-skinned people roles that are not only supporting roles, but leading roles.
I mean, a legit badass 007 Latino James Bond, that'd be pretty dope. I'm just saying.
If I could give a message to someone like me,
who's kind of looking at himself and feeling insecure,
just know, baby, you're beautiful.
Believe in yourself.
Just be you.
You are perfect just the way you are. That's something that no one has ever told me.
And your skin color is a gift. It's never been a blemish or a problem.
When you grow up and you look in the mirror and you're proud of who you are, it will make sense and all the other voices will go away. And all that's gonna be left is you.
Yeah, a very impactful video. I encourage you, I know Prasad has put in the chat that we'll share it. Thank you, Prasad, because it's worth another revisit to listen, but more impactfully, I've watched this video so many times, but what it does to me when I feel it is that I can feel the pain of those individuals in that video, particularly the young South Asian woman who is speaking about her experience with the Fair and Lovely cream, and it exists in other racialized communities. It exists in the Black community too, but I know it does exist in the South Asian community. And this is a very, very sensitized conversation that is not often brought to the surface in South Asian communities around the preference for lighter skinned people. If you're from the northern parts where the sun doesn't stay out as long, of course you're going to be a bit fairer. But I mean, the impacts of what you see on TV and what the media portrays in Hollywood, Bollywood for South Asians, it's always the lighter skin that are deemed to be the most beautiful. And if you could see the video and the tears in that young woman's eyes and the scars that it has left in her soul and on her arm, you can see where the cream, she reacted to it, and her face. I mean, these are deep traumas and emotions that individuals are experiencing because of their Blackness in communities. I think this is a pivotal time to also dive into the caste system conversation that, many South Asian communities, including Nepal, Pakistan, West Asia, Sri Lanka, India, still kind of live through today. And I know there's much conversation needed to be had. And I'm not quite sure where that is at in the South Asian community to bring up the notion of the caste system in interplay with the conversation of anti-Blackness, because it is there. Because the Dalits or the untouchables are usually the ones that are the darkest skin tone. Can somebody speak to me about that or correct me if I'm wrong? But what I've experienced is that those that are the lowest on the caste are those that look more blacker in their South Asian identity. Can we speak to this a bit?
I think it's a great opportunity to start a conversation. So those who would like to, say a word or two about this, please raise your hands and I'll allow you to. Please make sure that your comments are brief. Thank you.
I know it's a difficult one to have, but
I see Manoj is trying to speak.
Thank you.
Manoj, yes, please.
Good morning to all, and a very special thanks to Jean Johnson. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful presentation. And Jean has brought up very, very relevant subjects. And I feel that this has shared or informed and provide a lot of information about what we are facing, and one point we are unable to understand what is racism in our community, how much it is relevant. So first of all, thank you very much, Jean, for a wonderful subject you brought up, and Marco for bringing this very relevant subject to our attention and sharing this opportunity and providing this opportunity. Now, I just want to bring something in my views. I work as a social worker, counselor in a hospital in Niagara. Now, very often we come to this situation. There's one point I really like is the racism in two aspects. One in internal, the other one is external, called structural. And I got stuck with that one because that is the most relevant part for me from this presentation. So how to remove or how to improve our internal feeling of racism, that's by being informed what is racism and how where it is relevant. And of course, for external, we need a lot of support, a lot of publicity and public awareness. And I'm pretty sure that Masa will bring a look into that one in collaboration with other agencies. Now, my one point is that to dear Dean, this is racism not only in the black, we all experience in a different, because we all have a different color tone, or skin tone, skin tone. So, there is, of course, it happened to now, historically it has been happening to the black community, and I understand that point. And unfortunately, the other communities are not able to come up and not able to mobilize or not able to publicize and mobilize the world against this racism. And we all need to, irrespective of black, brown, yellow, is a time to come together and to bring this one to the national or to the regional, national, and international level to address this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Manoj. Thank you. I know that the sound is a little, like the voice is a little broken.
Yeah,
so Manoj is talking about the need for bringing collective voices to manage. But I'd like to ask the audience about very specifically on Jean's question on shadism. Anyone would like to add on to shadism?
Yeah, caste and color is very, in Indian context, is very clear. In terms of the mythology, if you see, the Asuras were considered as like from a darker skin tone and predominantly from southern part of India, and they were considered as, and it is there in every nook and corner of Indian context caste system. But when it comes to like immigrant communities, most often not many people from Dalit backgrounds have this opportunity to come into Canada. But a lot of immigrants who come into Canada come with the same caste-based thinking, unfortunately. And it holds good for a lot of immigrant communities. I'm not saying all, I'm not generalizing it, but opportunities for Dalit communities or people from like backward communities in India is not very much. It's very limited. So and color, and it's very interlinked. Like for instance, like as I said in the past, like if you look at the mythology, Asuras are considered as dark, and it's very clear in the way it is portrayed in comic books or in popular media or culture.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you. And I see that in the chat box, a couple of people would like to comment. So, I will be calling Arun Balakrishnan. And then the next is Margaret. So please be brief in your comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead, Arun. Please. We can hear you. Go ahead. I think Arun is having some technical difficulties. We'll allow Arun a little later. So I'm going to Margaret. Margaret?
Okay, I just...
Oh. Arun, just a second, okay? We called Margaret and I'll allow you to speak.
Can you hear?
We are having some difficulty, Arun. We'll come back to you, okay? Thanks. Margaret, please go ahead.
Hi. It's very timely, this conversation. I was just reading about something that somebody wrote about the caste system in America and their experience with it. They're working with, there's a South Asian person who was a Dalit, who was working with, had a South Asian supervisor or boss. And he was doing excellent work. The employee was experiencing every year amazing performance reviews, and was going to different events with him, dinners and whatnot. And I think it was about 5 years that he was working there, and they had a conversation with another individual and at dinner, and the conversation steered to the caste system. And the boss was saying, well, this is, our culture. This is, was here centuries. This is how it is. And the employee was like, no, the caste system is terrible. It is wrong. And spoke out against it and said, I'm a Dalit, and my people have been systematically or systemically discriminated against, and not seen within the context of our abilities and our talents, but of this caste system. And he wrote that when he went back and the next performance review, he received top marks always for his performance reviews. And when he received his next performance reviews, he was marked down a couple of stages. There wasn't any evidence, there wasn't anything that indicated, it was like, why? But this is what happened to him. And he was looking at that in the context of, what is happening in terms of the larger anti-Black racism that is happening. And I have to say that I've also experienced that as well, where I have been, let me say, passed over for my South Asian brother or sister who was not as experienced as I was, but seen as sort of like the safer or less threatening candidate for a particular position, not even coming close to the number of years I've had in the field. And I look at this in the context of the indigenous and the Black unity in this area, that I think that if we are really honest and looking at the fact that we are sharing a number of histories, and the system of oppression and whiteness pits us against each other and tries to create allyship and allyship with some and division with others, we would understand that, you know, if we don't unite on this, it is going to continue to divide and divide and divide. And, you know, I feel that the injury that we are experiencing, that spirit injury that's coming out in the video, is going to continue to perpetuate. That spirit injury is something that exists. It will come up even if there isn't like a linked or direct cause, like this has happened. And we've, in the scientific field, they have shown that, I mean, even experiments with animals, that they have, trauma has been experienced by a particular animal, and then it shows up in the subsequent generations, even though that they're not exposed to that trauma. And this is something that happens with us.
Generational trauma. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like we in Canada can never be complacent in buying into the idea of multiculturalism, this Canadian multiculturalism. We are being pitted against each other.
Okay.
And that's something that we have to unite on.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you, Margaret. And then over to Jean, because I'm also conscious about our time. Great points. And thank you for sharing your thoughts, Margaret.
Yeah. And this is, you know, this is why I love and hate the virtual session, because really we should be in a room, sitting in a circle for like a whole day together as community, really diving into these concepts that we brought to the surface through this video of what dark-skinned people want you to know, and coming together in the approach, as Margaret said, because if we don't, we are being pitted against each other. And what is at the root of everything is the construct of white supremacy and white privilege. And I think if we end this conversation, but not end it saying, can we pick this up somewhere at a later date to say and acknowledge that the caste system is built on the Aryan Indians that came from the north, and that caste system gave privileges to them that they then used to oppress those that were considered less than, less liked, and that acknowledged that in that social construct of the caste system, from the Brahmins to the Kashrichas, which I'm saying probably wrong, to the Vaishyas and the Shudras and the Dalits, that the construct is also around deity. It's around deity, which is the same construct of anti-blackness that has been constructed through the ladder of intellect, through Christianity, and the great chain of being, which is also through Christianity. And these constructs around the God complex of racial oppression needs to be delved into. And if I had time to write a PhD, that's what my PhD it would be on, the God construct of racism, because this is at the root of white supremacy. The notions and ideas of who we worship let us think that those that are darker skinned are farther removed from Creator. It's food for thought, and we could spend much more time. I think I'm gonna forego this because we've had some conversations. If you can move for the next slide, Cushman. What I want to get to is the impacts of what white supremacy is doing in the South Asian community that causes anti-Black sentiments as well. It means that we do get treated less than, in terms of our, we get treated with less curiosity than other people. And so South Asians are doing this to Blacks too, as Margaret exemplified. We get treated with less respect. We receive poorer service. People act as if they think we're not smart. They're afraid of us. As you see, that's what's happening to the Black males and females that get shot. It's a fear. People act as if we're dishonest. We are not given trustworthy status. They even think of us as a financial risk. They act as if they're better than us just by virtue, call us and names and insult us and threaten and harass us to the point of death. So these are some of the impacts. And I'm not saying this doesn't happen to other racialized communities. Yes, it does. But what we're here to explore today is the anti-blackness that is in racialized communities. And so these ideas and notions of who's at the top of the structure and who's at the bottom, and whiteness being preferred, South Asians, I believe, intrinsically know that there's a benefit to pushing away from African descentness, even in their own communities. There's a benefit that is given to South Asians for being complicit and implicit, subconsciously and unconsciously, to the white supremacist systemic structures that they work in. Because they see how Black people experience or do not get promotions and get devalued. And so they position themselves not to be that, so that they too can experience their own internal growth or less oppression. They don't want to be seen as colluding with Blackness because it gives them less. They know this to be true. And so what they do, sometimes inadvertently, is collude in systems of whiteness and support hegemonic white colonialist approaches and ideas that are harming them too, but it's less harmful. Is that making sense? We have to explore this together because if we don't, Margaret is absolutely right, we can get white people to understand their whiteness, but if racialized people don't understand their internalized racism, we will not have done away with anti-Black racism and anti-Black sentiment. Next slide. And if you click again, these are the things that are kind of deep that you need to know about racism, the types of racism that exist, the old-fashioned, the modern, and the aversive. Next slide. We know the old-fashioned racism is the overt racial hatred and bigotry. Like, those people I can deal with because I know what they think about me in my Black identity. And I just have to say and preface that I am also a light-skinned Black person, what they call high yellow in the Black community. And so, yes, my genetics has been infiltrated with whiteness. You can see it. And so I experience a different type of anti-Blackness than people that look more African descent than me. And this happens in our families where we get different shades of Black. And so our lived experiences are also quite different. Next slide. Modern symbolic racism, a little bit more prejudice, but still very, very what we call ambiguous in nature, and still very difficult to express and see. But it's expressed by those who may or may not perceive themselves to be racist. They're modern in their racism and justify some of their negative judgments and behaviors by not abiding to traditional values or dominant values, and speak about people not fitting in here, and this is why they're being treated differently. And they perceived but agree on these objections through standards or things that they think are universal truths about the way that people and individuals are supposed to behave, or think that there are universal truths about individuals based on race that they don't think people are fitting in. Next slide. And then we have aversive racism, which is the least consciously negative. But racist things are happening, usually unintentional, and they will avoid individuals that they think are overt racists, and they believe in the notion of fairness when people are being aversive racists, and they believe in equity and belonging, and actually think they're quite fair, and actually detest and attest inequity and injustice, and fight for justice for all. But really, through their socialization, in society and their inability to grapple with their deep-seated ideas and thoughts that they have not unpacked, they will behave in racist ways unknowingly. And these types of individuals are actually more dangerous because they are unaware that they're unaware that they have socialization, thoughts, behaviors, and actions that are injuring and murdering people's spirits. And they trip up on themselves all the time and will just say, but I'm a nice person, or, but I'm religious, or I'm a vegetarian. And I say that profusely. I've met many vegetarians that think that being vegetarian means that they're a nice person. And so they lack the ability to cognitively understand the deep rootedness of the racism that has been implanted and socialized through their schooling, their parenting, their religion. And so it's very innocuous in terms of the way that they come across. And they're very, very hurt when you try to tell them that there are things that are wrong. Next slide. I think the next slide just really, really brings home the idea that if you push the button again, Kusaman, you'll see that the visibility of the racism from old-fashioned to averse kind of disappears whilst the harm increases. And this is where we start to explore the microaggressions that occur against Black individuals within workspaces and in society. And it is in the aversive racism that these microaggressions exhibit themselves. Next slide. One of the things we'll look at in this video is how the constructs of the racism it gets embedded and ingrained even through media. Not sure if you've seen this one called Pathologizing Black Behavior, Black Protests vs. White Riots. We'll look at this and have a very brief conversation.
Funny how the media covers white riots versus Black protests. News. Seems like when the protesters are Black, the media uses some pretty harsh words. The bad guys, lawlessness, looting, wild animals, criminals, and thugs.
Thugs. Isn't it the right word?
However, if you're white and you're tearing up the city because of a game, you're just young people.
Young people danced on it, flipped over cars. As UK fans did stupid things.
Maybe got a little out of control.
Seeing a scene like this just shows how passionate the UK fans are.
It's so tough to lose, and unfortunately the ugly side that we sometimes see in sports.
And notice how the police always show up to a Black protest in military-grade equipment, and yet the media claims they're just doing nothing.
It's inexplicable why the police are doing nothing. Let's mobilize the National Guard.
If I'm a riot and I see the police doing nothing, I might feel like I have a license.
You would.
But at white riots, the cops actually are standing around doing nothing.
Another group of cops over there just standing there.
No one was really doing anything.
These guys look like they could be watching a parade. And why is it that the leadership of the Black community is always called into question?
Where is the leadership?
Leadership.
The Black leadership.
The absence of leadership.
And it goes back to leadership, but that leadership has to come from the community.
But no one ever questions the leadership of white parents who let their kids burn down and vandalize the college campus.
These are just young college students who think they're playing some kind of a game with police officers.
You know, sometimes they don't even call a white riot a riot.
Party gone awry.
Some fans got a bit too rowdy after the win.
A dispute, a bloody brawl.
There was some type of altercation.
Waco, 170 arrested, 9 people dead.
They're not thugs.
Baltimore, no deaths, but it's a riot, chock full of thugs.
Thugs.
Just thugs. What if the media portrayed white rioters the same as Black protesters? Let's switch the audio and see how it plays out.
Breaking news, violent protest.
What you're looking at is the unraveling of the civil society.
Criminals and thugs.
And they're raising hell, and they're destroying property.
These idiotic thugs, rioting and looting,
Are hurting their own people.
Wild animals burning buildings down?
Especially if they know the media's all there, right? Got the cameras on everyone. It's become its own reality show.
Who acts like that towards a police officer?
Think for yourself. Don't let racist media color your perceptions. Demand fairness in media coverage. Tell the media to put an end to calling Black people thugs.
Thanks, Kushman. If you could go to the next slide. I think, you know, in the essence of time, I'm looking at the time, it's 12:23. We've got so much to explore. I think where I want to land this is like, in terms of our perceptions of Black identity and how civil unrest gets challenged by us, we've always, been through a movement. I mean, Malcolm X was by any means necessary. Martin Luther King was nonviolent. You can experience even Gandhi's nonviolence approach. And many say that there was another side of Gandhi that I have to explore. But I think, both things need to be true. Like, at what point do we sit back and not protest in vehement ways to the continued dehumanization and demoralization of Black bodies? I think I am, for civil peace and protests, but it's quite interesting to see today how things have changed in terms of more allies who are not Black joining in the Black Lives Matter movement and standing at the front of that, because they understand intrinsically the approach the police would take if they did not stand in front to those Black protesters, where riot shields and gas and other means of crowd control are used. And then when white people stand at the front, their bodies are so respected that the protests are allowed to happen. So, I think the idea and the notion that Black bodies are less than can even be exhibited and understood through how the Black Lives Movement are using allies at the forefront. But allies also have to understand they cannot speak to our experience. That is ours to do. And we have been doing for hundreds of years. What they need to do is ally and stand beside us in that experience, which I see is happening. The notion of internalized oppression needs to be addressed, which is the other side of the coin of whiteness and the coin of white supremacy. If I could get a volunteer to read this would be great.
I could go again.
Thank you. In the essence of time, I'm going to say thank you.
All right. Internalized oppression. Internal oppression operates at both the individual and group level. Individuals experiencing marginalization accept and believe, often unconsciously, that the stereotypes and misinformation about themselves or the group they identify with are true. As a result, the individual will act in ways that reinforce the dominant stereotypes, which are ultimately self-defeating and harmful to them. They may also act negatively towards members from their own group, resulting in undermining, isolating, mistrustful, or conflictual behaviors. Tappan, 2006.
Thank you so much. And this is to be explored in a deep way. And Donna Bevins has done some work on the idea of internalized oppression, looking at internalized racism, because we need to explore how the hegemonic system of whiteness has been brought into our own psyche as racialized people, that makes us start to believe what the dominant is putting out, like what you see in media and the news about Black individuals, that cause not only Black individuals to hate themselves and to think that other Blacks that are protesting, galvanizing, advocating are not doing the right things, or it causes this type of self-hatred, that this self-fulfilling prophecy about you think I am, therefore I am. And then you start to behave in ways that the master wants you to behave in order to keep the system status quo. Next slide. So the notion of the internalized oppression and racism really situates the racist system. When a racial group oppressed by racism starts to support the notions and ideas of white supremacy and dominance of the dominant group, and they start to maintain or participate in those attitudes, behaviors, and social constructs and ideologies that undergird and support the dominant group's power and privilege. And then it starts to limit the oppressed people and the oppressed group's own advantages. So like systemic racism, Bevan says that it manifests in 4 dimensions at the inner, interpersonal, and institutional level. And then what is at the root of this now is something that DeGray is researching, and she was in the video, What Dark-Skinned People Want You to Know, this notion of post-traumatic slavery syndrome, which is the cycle of oppression that leaves deep wounded scars and embeds themselves into the psyche of the oppressed, and it robs them of their humanity. Next slide. I'm going to forego, and you know, this is another slide piece that was just exemplifying that, you know, the videos we watched are very much US based, but this one was a Canadian context. I'm going to ask that the group share it with you, that you can see, you know, that it was around policing Black lives in Canada, done by the National. And you'll see the same type of experience here on Canadian soils, where Black men and women are dying and are being terrorized at the hands of the police. Next slide. I'm gonna ask you to go to slide 28, which is the next slide. Yeah. So, you know, the microaggressions are what I told you about in terms of what happens in the aversive racism, and there are 4 types of these microaggressions: micro insults, micro invalidations, micro assaults, and environmental microaggressions. And you know, in exploring these, and there's much being written by Dr. Gerald Sue, defining the micro insults as actions or remarks, and the micro invalidations of interpersonal comments and behavior that really dismiss and excludes and negates the feelings and experience of marginalized people, and in this context, in terms of racialized people. Understanding microaggressions gives the ability for individuals to be able to put language to their experience of racial oppression. And so I would encourage individuals to do more research on microaggressions. In the context of time, again, I want to go to slide 32 that is titled 5 Common Anti-Black Microaggressions. Keep going, because I will share the presentation and people can read this. Keep going. Keep this one right here. And these are where, no, back one, Kasam, back one. Prasad, are we okay to go for another 5 minutes? Okay. The assumption of color blindness, minimizing or questioning the existence of anti-Black racism and cultural issues, asking Black and African descent people to speak on behalf of the entire group, just as you saw in the video. Where's the leader? Where's the leader? When other communities make mistakes and mishaps, it is an aberration. This is just an individual experience. When anyone in the Black community does something untoward, it becomes a community problem, a community issue, and then the attributes get splattered on every single person that is Black. The denial of personal bias towards African Canadians. Oh, but I have a Black friend. They're really, really nice. Oh, my son is married to a Black person. Or, so you know this one Black person that you quantify as the Black experience. Or showing cultural insensitivities or making stereotypical comments towards individuals who are of African descent. I think what is important is understanding that individuals really in communities, if you have not done your deep work, next slide, for the binary, that people have to understand that you're usually a recovering racist if you haven't done your anti-Black racist work. Is that making sense for people? you're usually a recovering racist. Just as I'm heterosexual and I don't fully understand the LGBTQ issues because it's not my lived experience, then I am recovering heterosexist. So if you are non-Black and you're not doing your deep work in your social work practice to understand the lived experience of Black people, you are a recovering anti-Black racist. Making sense? There's also been lots of research done by Sherry Watt on how we explore our privilege, our racial privilege. And she developed something called the pie model, which is slide 36. Prasam, keep going. Keep going. This, yes, the pie model, back one. Thank you. Back one, that's forward. Just back one. Yes, the pie model. Sherry Watts, I think she's out of the University of Columbia, but don't quote me on that. You can look her up. Did some research to show when we are having these type of deep conversations on race and oppression, that we default to when we are being called into the conversation. We have to recognize our privileged identity, we have to contemplate it, and then we have to address it. And there's a number of reactions that are usually, that we go through to deflect and deflate from us being racist. And I'll leave you to learn more about Sherry's work in terms of the privileged identity model. What we do need to move through, next slide, is understanding that at the root of this issue of anti-Blackness is white privilege and white supremacy, that it's situated to benefit people that are identified in Western countries and by non-white people under the same kind of social structures that we've been discussing, and that we have to do a lot to unpack this. And we have to unpack the whiteness that is in our racialized systems as well. And if we don't, then you are going to be failing as social workers and social service providers in providing culturally relevant and safe services to individuals who are Black. I think that we have to call you in to doing more exploration of the anti-Blackness within your own community. Next slide. And through this, Robin DiAngelo has talked about the notion of white fragility in when we explore white supremacy. And there is racialized fragility as well in how we bring individuals of South Asian descent into exploring what is happening in their own communities based on the systems and structures that are built on whiteness. If you could go to the slide titled Cross-Racial Hostility, slide 44, Kasem, keep going. Slide 44, Ross, yeah, keep going. Keep going. This slide right here, I think this is where I will likely try to wrap up my thoughts and allow maybe a few minutes just for questioning, is that this notion of cross-racial hostility is where we need to land in racialized communities and groups. It's a term that's been coined for what has happened between groups of racialized people that Margaret alluded to in terms of a racist system when one oppressed group, a racial group, supports the oppression of another oppressed racial group by supporting, benefit from, maintaining, or participating in the set of attitudes, behaviors, and social structures and ideologies that undergird the dominant racist supremacy. And so this cross-racial hostility is what needs to be explored from a South Asian context, that in the context of the work that you do, how is your work supporting white supremacist notion, ideas, and beliefs in vis-a-vis dismantling and deconstructing anti-Blackness? And this is where Gloria says, racialized communities should be doing our work. We must work here to decenter whiteness in our relationships, and we must learn to appreciate and learn about and from each other directly, and not through white systems and white structures that pit us against each other. Is this making sense? And so conversations like we've had today is where we need to dive into to be able to explore, extrapolate, and dismantle and decolonize racism and anti-blackness, so that we can fully understand the impacts of the confiscating of the indigenous people's lands, slavery, segregation of schools, internment camp, Chinese head tax, police brutality, forced migrations, the dehumanization of racialized people, the mass incarceration of Black bodies, the medical experimentation that still continues today on racialized people, the overrepresentation in child welfare, the way that Black bodies and racialized bodies are forced and pushed out of our high schools. And so you have to call each other in to this very, very important conversation. You have to learn and unlearn about racism and anti-Black racism. You have to understand that racism is happening everywhere all the time, and that it's not about if, it is about when and how, and that there's much medium in terms of Google and Twitter feeds, and what this community of association and practice is doing to help you to build your toolkit to be able to have these critical conversations, so that we can deeply understand the systemic nature of the issue that is present day in terms of the racialization of poverty, the underemployment and unemployment of Black bodies, the efforts that we need to do to look at the disparities in social service and social service sectors for racialized Black people. And the power is within you to understand that anti-Black racism and oppression needs to be addressed within racialized communities, because it's often not believed to be real racial trauma and impact on our bodies. So the more that you do to deconstruct anti-Blackness in your work by collecting data, reporting on it, developing advisory committees of African descent people to help you, developing cross-sectorial tables, consider collaborating more across racialized communities to address racism and anti-Blackness, is the ways that we have to do to end anti-Blackness within South Asian communities and other racialized communities. I want to thank you for the time and opportunity. I'm sorry we didn't have 10 hours to do this talk. It's a critical conversation, and you know that there is no silver bullet. It starts with you. You have to be the one that picks up the tools of knowledge building by just starting by reading about anti-Blackness and the impacts of anti-Black racism and anti-Black sentiments systemically within your institutions. But thank you so much for being here and for listening, and I'll turn it back to Prasad and Alan.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Jean. And we are pressed with time, but we can definitely allow a couple of comments. And I really appreciate you to be precise and maybe using 15 to 30 seconds. So this is an opportunity. Who would like to go first? I know that Arun wanted to talk and then didn't get a chance because of audio trouble. Arun?
Hi, Prasad, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to just agree with Jean that we in our Indian or South Indian or like South Asian communities, we have a high preference for light skin. We call them like fair skinned or light skinned people, and we tend to discriminate people even right from the like teachers discriminate them right from the school and competitions and universities and curricular activities and opportunities, and I think it goes to the marriage. And so we always have a preference for light skin, which which we relate that here in Canada as well. So that's something we need to reflect critically when we talk about ABR, or when we say we are no racist, we should think about how we look at light skin.
Yes, absolutely. Because shadeism, racism is a real thing within the South Asian community and other racialized communities. And as I said, it's this internalized notion and idea of what is preferred. And the lighter, the brighter, the better. And so that is constructed in white supremacist notions and beliefs that need to be unpacked and examined.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Anyone else?
I see a comment about racism is a broader term in history. Jews faced the highest racism. You know, I'm just going to push back a little bit on that and say there is no hierarchy when it comes to the death of people based on the social construct of race and based on white dominance and supremacy. And unfortunately, the Jewish people are also not thought to be white, right? They're an ethnic group. But let's not get into this who had more racism. Once human beings are dying and being dehumanized based on not being white, it's a travesty, period.
Yeah. And then, you know, it's not an Olympics. We are not really trying to say who is most oppressed. I think the issue is that we realize that, you know, our brothers and sisters are being treated differently than us. When we see those, and as helping professionals, how are we going to come together and how are we going to challenge the systemic oppression that we see in our day-to-day lives and at work? This is a very good session. It's just a start, and I understand that. And thank you everyone for being a part of this. So I hope no one have any comments. So therefore, I'm planning to wind down the session. Alan, over to Alan to formally wind down the session.
Thank you, Prasad. Jagga. I just want to let you know, thank you everybody for joining this wonderful session, and thank you, Jean, for being part of this Maswa webinar, and thank you, Prasad, for moderating this session. And once again, thank you every participants to joining us on this Saturday, and Maswa will be continuing our webinar sessions, and please follow us on the social media platforms, and we will be uploading the YouTube video of the session in the Maswa social medias as well. And we will be sending the survey form to your emails, as also the certificate of participation as well. So thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of the weekend.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, everyone.